We are going to work with Chapter 6, Project 1 Dice. So this is an exercise. So let's go ahead and create a new. So we go to New, and then we're going to select Class. Of course, we need to have a project already defined. We are going to call it Chapter 6, Project 1 Dice. And let's make sure that we check the creation of main method. All right, we are going to need that. Okay, so the first step to solve this problem is to carefully read the directions. Create an integer array named dice1 with a size of 10. Populate each array location with the roll of a 6-sided die, and then it gives us a hint, an int value of 1 through 6. Print the array out using an enhanced for loop. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So we are going to work in the main method, and we read create an integer array. So let's go ahead and create this integer array. So remember the notation. We have int, and then we open and close square braces. We are going to call it dice1. And then we are going to initialize it by using the new keyword. And then we need to define the size, and the directions tell us that it's 10, right? That's what we know. So we are also going to declare some variables. We're going to have random, and this variable is going to store the temporary random number. Remember, we have to generate 10 random numbers. Then let's go ahead and create another variables which are not required, but they are very useful. They're going to be mint, we're going to be equal to 1, and the max, we're going to be equal to 6, because those are the minimum and maximum values that a dice can have. Then we need to write a for loop in order to initialize this array of dice that has 10 elements. Those elements are going to go from 0 to 9. 9 will be the last element. Remember, in Java, all the arrays start at 0. So let's go ahead and write that for loop. The first part of the for loop is the initialization. Notice that we are declaring a variable of type integer, I, and we make it equal to 0 because that is the index of the first element of the array. Then the termination condition, we are going to be looping as long as I is less than the number of elements. So that is going to be dice1, the length. All right? And then we increment I. We are going to open and close curly braces since we are going to have multiple statements. And what we need to do inside this block of code is to give this random variable a random values. We need to assign a random value from 1 to 6. So what is the formula to do that? Well, the only formula or the only method that we know to generate a random number is math.random. So let's go ahead and write it down. Now, math.random generates a random number between 0 and 1. And that's not what we want. We want a random number between 1 and 6. So what we have to do is we are going to multiply times the range. The range is max minus min. And then after that, we're going to add 1, and I'll explain you why we're adding 1 in a second. And then after we do this, notice that the result will be of type double, and random is of type integer. So this is going to give us an error message. So we will have to cast it into an int, right? Using the open and close parenthesis with the target data type. Then after we have casted it, we are going to add the min value. And that will give us a random value between 1 and 6. Now, why are we adding this 1? Well, if we don't add the 1, we are going to get values, random numbers between 1 and 5. And that is because math at random generates random value between 0 and 1, excluding 1. So then math at random will never give us a 1. That's why we'll need to add a 1. And then after we cast it, we are going to get the correct values, right? And we add min. There, we are going to be okay. All right. So with this, we have completed the random number, but we haven't stored any values into the array. So let's go ahead and type dice1, and then we need to pass the index. Remember, the index is going to be given by this variable I, which at the beginning is going to be equal to 0, and then after it gets incremented is going to be equal to 1. Remember, I++ is the increment operator, and then it's going to be equal to 2, and so forth. It's going to increase by 1 at each iteration until it is equals to the length. In that case, it exits the loop, right? So we are going to say dice1I equals to the random number, right? Random which we just generated, okay? And with that, we're fine. Now you say, well, we're done then. And well, not really. We have to display the results. And we need to use a for loop because that's what it's asking us. Print out the array using an enhanced for loop. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, very, very simple. We just pretty much recycle this for loop. And then in the next video, I'm going to show you an easier way to do this, a more efficient way to do this. But for now, this is going to be okay. We just display the array values. So we're going to start by using the system.out.print. All right, dice1. And notice that we don't use println because we don't want a new line. And in here, we just have to display the value of each element of dice1. We can use print or we can use printf. I am going to use printf. So if you're not familiar with printf, make sure that you familiarize yourself. It is very, very useful. And so we are going to use %d because it's an integer. Remember, %d gives us an integer and then a space. We can have a space or we can have commas, whatever we prefer. It's just a way that we are going to separate the numbers, right? So then we need to display the value of the current element of the array. In this case, we are going to be displaying dice1I, right? Remember, I is going to be equal to 0 at the beginning because of the initialization. And then we are going to display the first element, which is dice1, 0. And then it's going to increment I. I will be equal to 1. And then it's going to display dice1I, which is I will be equal to 1, and so forth, as long as the value of the variable I, which is the looping variable, is less than the number of elements inside dice1. All right? So let's go ahead and compile. And there we go. We have the result. So we have 10 random values for the dice, and notice that 6 also appears, right? So random values from 1 through 6. Notice that our program works, and we tried it, and it prints the correct values. And now one problem with this is that, well, which is actually not a problem, but notice that the description asks us for an enhanced for loop. And we should always follow the description. Our program may be working perfectly, like in this case, but it has to follow the description. If not, it may not be correct. So we have to make sure that we do that. So how do we print the array using an enhanced for loop? Well, first of all, let's find out what we are doing. We are using what is called an index for loop. Notice that we're using an index variable. And that index variable is going to give us the index of the array. So how can we use an enhanced for loop, just like it's asking us here? So what we'll do is we are going to remove this line of code, right? And then we're going to type int, and we are going to call it dice num, and then colon dice 1. So what is it doing in this case? Well, notice that I'm no longer using the index, but we are declaring a variable called dice num, which is of type integer, and is going to contain an element of dice 1. Now, what element will it be? Well, at the very beginning, it's going to be the first element, then it's going to be the second element, and so forth. So I need to replace this dice 1I, which now is giving me an error message because I no longer have the index variable I, by dice num, right? So I do that, and now it should work. Let's go ahead and run it. And there we go. We get the exact same result, right? And then you say, well, these are not the same numbers. Well, they are not because we're generating random numbers, okay? But the effect is the same, right? So this for loop is now an enhanced for loop, just like the description wanted. Which one is better? Is the index loop better than the enhanced for loop? No, it's not that one is better than the other one. It depends on what we are trying to do. In some cases, it is just better to have this index for loop. Some other cases, it may be beneficial to have this enhanced for loop.